Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Skills Workshop. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you're rejoining us, certainly a welcome back. My name is Memento Chiringa, and I'm going to be your host this evening. We're approaching the end of the Skills Workshop for 2021. There is just one session to go. So tonight, we're going to be focusing on competency questions, what to expect, and giving you some tangible examples of how to tackle these in your upcoming interviews and assessment centers. So joining me today, guys, is Lindsay Stewart to help deliver this session on behalf of the CFA. Lindsay works at the FRC, the Financial Reporting Council, and he sits on the Black Professionals Network for CFA UK. I won't steal his thunder, so I will let Lindsay introduce himself.
Thank you, Memento. Great to have such a good introduction. Fantastic to have everybody join us for this session. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. So perhaps I'll just start with a bit of an introduction to myself. I'm a finance professional with over 20 years experience. I've taken a very roundabout route through the industry, through investor relations, through to technical accounting, advisory and audit within the Big Four. Then I took an investor engagement manager role within a Big Four firm that I worked for quite recently. And my most recent role, which I've been in for 3 months, is I'm the head of stakeholder engagement at the Financial Reporting Council, as Memento mentioned. So why am I here to talk to you about sales? Even though I don't work in a direct sales role, I feel like the idea of influencing people and communicating with people and helping them reach decisions on what they're going to go for and what they're not going to go for has been a strong theme throughout, whether it's a case of advising a company on their investor relations strategy, who their shareholders are, what they think of management, what they think of the current state of the business. There's that influencing role there. Essentially, you have to sell them an idea. The same with advocating for the merits and demerits of a particular accounting policy that a standard setter is trying to adopt. Again, there's kind of a bit of a sales element there where you have to emphasize the merits and demerits of what's being proposed. And the same in investor engagement and stakeholder engagement at the moment. I deal with policies that not everybody is going to be happy with, but policies that we believe are for the benefits and the public interest of the UK. And again, there's that sales and influence. Those ideas are always useful to thread through your career. So perhaps dig in.
Yeah,
go ahead, Memento.
So thank you, Lindsay. I'm gonna first go back a little bit, and a little bit of housekeeping that we're gonna take care of. Before I let Lindsay go into the deep stuff that he's about to take us into there, but really
Sure.
Introduction, Lindsay. Myself, as I said, my name is Memento Chiringa, and I am a fiduciary manager at LGIM. In terms of my own background, I've been at LGIM coming up 4 years now. Prior to that, I worked at Aon, really been coming up to a decade in the investment industry. So really excited to be here. And now that we all know who we are and what we're going to expect today, so that's really going into those questions. And as Lindsay said, sort of getting on and sort of leveraging our existing experiences that you might not think of as sales and that you might not think of as are particularly relevant before this session to your interview questions and the assessment centers, helping you reframe that so that it's quite a key a tool that you can look back at and help you in those sessions. So a quick reminder is that this is a webinar, so we can't see your faces, unfortunately, but please use the question and answer segment. So there's a function there that you can see. Please use that. Your questions will come to us, and as many of those that we can come to today will cover, and any others we can look to follow up. You can email us directly and we can come back on that. Another reminder is that all of our sessions are free to register. And I guess you guys are here, so you've registered, but the details are in the chat box. And without further ado, too much of my chit chat there, grab your pens, your books, and then let's get straight back to Lindsay on tonight's workshop. Thank you, Lindsay. Please go ahead.
Sure, thanks Memento. So Yeah, probably just taking you back to the beginning of my career. It's just working in investor relations. So what I did was I was a consultant for companies within the UK, within Europe, helping them understand who their shareholders were and what their shareholders thought of strategy, of the management team, of the performance of the company on the stock market, of the valuation of the company, whether the share of the company was an attractive thing to buy or not, from a pure investment perspective, which is kind of where you kind of hone those skills in terms of communication and influencing that absolutely crucial to a sales role within the investment industry, whether that's on the buy side, i.e. Institutions like the one Memento works for that buy shares and hold them within portfolios to grow their clients' money, or on the sell side, i.e. in investment banks, which are more concerned with deal making and trading and making sure there's a liquid market for those securities that the buy side firms trade. So having spent about 13 years doing that investor relations consulting role, really advocating for the shares of a company as a product, I moved into the Big Four, where it was more kind of taking those skills to advocate for accounting policies that were more palatable, more appropriate for investors to use to help them make decisions over which shares or other financial instruments that they were going to buy or sell, to help them inform their investment decisions. So again, there was that thread of communication and influence. And those are the same tools that I use in the regulatory area that I'm in now, where it's more advocating for policies that are a benefit to investors and broader stakeholders, whether that's pension funds, asset managers, or just retail investors and savers who have an interest in the way that companies are run and directed and controlled and how they report in the UK. So there's that thread there. You will have heard me use the words communicating and influence throughout all of that. And those are the key cornerstones, if you like, to kind of putting together a decent career in investment industry, and particularly in that sales role. You need to know how to get your own message across and how to help bring other people around to your point of view. So why am I particularly here to talk about sales? Well, we live in capitalist democracies, which are controlled by markets, and that's how things are delivered to people, whether it's investments or just everyday products like this chair or this table that I'm sat at now. Everything requires a sale somewhere. If you have it, somebody probably did sell it to you. Years and years ago, I used to think that sales was a bit of a dirty word, as probably because I had to spend a very, very early job trying to sell windows to people from a smoky phone room in East London. So it's probably just tarnished my idea of it. But now I really like the idea. And sales in finance is a particularly important role, because finance isn't just a case of selling people investment products. I like to think of it as it's the hopes and dreams industry. When people invest or when people save, they're thinking about what they want for the future. Are they saving for a mortgage? Do they want their own home? When do they want to retire? Do they want to finance an education? Is there a charity or a cause that they would like to fund? It really is the hopes and dreams industry. So it really does bring home why it's such an important role. So just moving on from that, the brief that I've been given for today, maybe you read it in the invite email, is that I'm hoping to help you get an understanding of the ways to navigate interview questions by tying your unique story into the valuable skills that you can bring to a role. You might have heard quite a lot of the time about the importance of storytelling in communications, or you might not, but it is a key theme. Is that it's not just a case of relaying facts to people when you are trying to communicate and influence with them, but they're expecting to hear a unique and coherent narrative. So you need to think about building that for yourself in terms of getting through the interview, and for the products that you sell. If you're eventually successful, you'll need to kind of think about bringing that narrative.
I think, when you say that, Lindsay, it's almost like a jibe to sort of ask me to ask you something there. What is your unique story and how do you tell it?
Okay, that's very interesting. I think about like my purpose in the roles that I've done is that I have a very analytical mind. Like I studied the accountancy exams, I studied the CFA exams, got through all of those. I'm kind of the person who has those communication skills, who can take those sort of complex topics. I mean, I did a lot of work on like IFRS 17 and insurance accounting. So you have to bring together accounting knowledge, financial knowledge, actuarial knowledge, but I can kind of distill it and explain it to people in ways they can understand. So I did a lot of work pulling together communications. I have books that I've helped author where I'm either explaining things to people through, illustrations or diagrams or charts, or even just through prose or through articles, trying to connect with people, trying to see the similarities and differences between things using various everyday scenarios that they'd be familiar with. You can Google some of the work that I've done if you're that interested in insurance accounting. I'm sure very few people are.
We certainly are, but I'm starting to see that those communication and influencing words. Please continue, Lindsay.
Sure. So what's really important in the interview process is that you tell your own story. Don't be afraid to personalize it. You need to demonstrate a basic level of knowledge, understanding what the institution that you're interviewing with actually does, who are their clients, thinking from a buy-side perspective, which products do they market to their end beneficiaries, which instruments are they invested in, what are their goals, what's in the mandate, what targets do they have to hit. Try and understand all of that from whatever's publicly available. Tie that into your skills, whether that's your analytical skills, whether it's your communication skills, whatever it is, tie it in, know what your skills are, and that will require you to have an honest self-assessment of exactly what your strengths and weaknesses are. And there's plenty of places you can look that up. But you do have to demonstrate that basic knowledge and skill. And then you tie that in to a specific story that you can relate in the interview room when those competency questions come up.
Go on, Lindsay. Did you?
Sorry, I thought you were going to come in there. No worries.
Oh no, I'm sorry about that. No. You please continue. Yeah.
Yes, of course. So competency questions. One of the things that come up most often, they often have very little to do with the specific or the actual role itself. A lot of the time they'll be asking you about your communication skills, or how well you work under pressure, your organization and planning skills, or are there times when you've shown resilience, or times when you've had to demonstrate integrity or taking control of the situation. So you need to start thinking about the kind of challenges that will come up in your role, and prepare to give an account of how you've either dealt with those previously, whether it's in jobs that you've worked, or within your studies, or within other personal situations, or even in the things that you do in your spare time. And they often talk about using the STAR technique, which is talking about STAR, the four letters that make this up: the situation, the task, the action, and the result. So thinking about the situation you're in. For example, let's say your interviewer asked you about a time that you influenced somebody to make a decision that helped the organization you're representing or yourself. You can think about a situation you're in. Yes, one time I persuaded somebody to buy some, badges to raise money for charity, for example. What I did, I set myself certain targets. I decided on which people would be most receptive, and I went out and I had a coherent story that I told them about why this charity was important. So that's thinking more about the task and the action. And what result did you get? I managed to sell 70 of these badges, and I raised £100 for charity, for example. That's your STAR technique. So that's something that a lot of people can think about, using that to help frame those competency questions and be prepared for them, particularly in the sales environment.
Yeah, I think I would certainly second that. I think I'd also written about the STAR technique. A lot is written about it. A lot of books out there. I would recommend, you don't need books. There's, videos on YouTube. There's also a lot of articles written about it. And the thing that you can do that can help you sort of ahead of actually going to the interviews is think about those key competencies that employers want to see. They want to see that, in a sales role, you're able to work in a team, but you're also able to pick out what your valuable contributions are. You're able to influence. So I think very much the example that Lindsay was giving of how have you influenced, and actually the key thing I think I was gonna mention on this, the point on the action. Quite often when I've been interviewing, people do use the STAR technique, but then they come to the what happened, and then they talk about what the team did. And I know sometimes when you feel like you've not had a big impact on a project, it can be hard to sort of take on what you did. But what I would advise you to do is to make sure you really think about, when you're preparing for these questions, really think about what you have done, what you've specifically contributed, even if it's a small part, even if you say, my role was to make sure that the minutes were carefully taken down, and that resulted in everybody knowing exactly what was happening, as part of the project, because I did my role to take minutes perfectly. Because that's much better than saying, okay, the team did this, and then this, and you haven't been able to identify your actual contribution to what you've done there. Sorry for jumping in there, Lynn.
No, that's quite all right. No, that's really, really useful intervention. So yeah, absolutely what Memento says. And again, tying it back to your storytelling, don't be afraid to introduce the idea of how you encountered a problem and overcame it. Nobody really needs to hear about how everything went perfectly smoothly, or how how everything went perfectly. A lot of the time it can really help give people an insight into your character, into your resilience, if you explain times when not everything went perfectly, how you handled it, how you might apply those difficult learnings to what you were doing in the future.
Yeah, no, that's very valuable insight, extremely valuable there.
No, thank you. I see we're getting a couple of questions coming in.
Perhaps yes, exactly. I was about to actually pin out one of those. So there's one question here about whether the process varies with different job roles, and I will, field that to you, Lindsay. And in your experience, what have you seen, and what insights can you give to that question?
Yes. As I said, I've only just joined the organization I'm in, so clearly I've been in an interview process fairly recently. And yes, the process, it does vary by different job roles. There are things that require a great deal of technical complexity, and so they might test that those skills a bit more. But generally in the competency-based questions, they tend to be looking for the same sort of thing. They're just trying to ascertain whether they have somebody who is competent, who they can trust, who makes good decisions. Essentially, that's kind of it. And again, with the sales angle, that communication and influence, those skills are absolutely essential. So again, just to reiterate, it's a case of making sure that you bring with you an honest assessment of your knowledge and your skills. Don't try to embellish it. Be self-aware and know your strengths, and admit where you need to develop, because nobody's looking really for the finished product. They're looking for people that will apply themselves and learn what they need to learn and overcome the hurdles they need to learn, and then tie that in with your own unique story.
You picked out a really, really important concept there, self-aware. And I think we'll go on to touch on self-awareness as we go through this session, because I think that's one of the key things that you're trying to get to from an interview. I mean, there's questions like, tell us about a time when you did this. Tell us about a time when you achieved this. And all of those are really trying to see what your contribution is, what you see, what is, what you've done within an interview. And I'll certainly second what Lindsay said. In terms of the structure or how an interview goes, I think it's not even by job role. Sometimes it's by interviewer. It's what the interviewer is trying to see. So I wouldn't be wedded to a structure of an interview. But what I would say as part of your preparation is to make sure wherever you are, you're thinking about yourself, your story, your skills, your experiences. And then that means if you come in and an interviewer is a bit less formal, or an interviewer wants to ask you, questions the other way around, maybe they want to start with competency questions, then ask you to talk about yourself, then you're prepared for anything that comes. I would say, even if you go on Glassdoor and those kind of organizations and read what people say interviewers are like, it's very unlikely that it will be the exact same structure, but don't let that throw you off, because everything else might be different, but you're still yourself. Your story is still your story, and you should be able to still articulate it and get across what you want the interviewer to see about you, which is that you're excited about the role, you're capable, you're an accountable person, you have the skills, and you have the motivation to take on the role. Anything else you'd want to add there, Lindsay? I also see we have another question in there.
No, I think you summed that up perfectly. Really, really good summary there. Perhaps we can move on to that other question. What's a good way to demonstrate that you can explain complex topics in a simple way? And if you are told to explain a complex topic in a simple way, what are good topics to talk about? Oh, quite a lot packed in there. Right, a good way to demonstrate that you can explain complex topics in a simple way. I'm always using my mother as a guinea pig for this kind of thing, because like she doesn't work in the financial industry. She was a midwife for a long time, so she's capable of understanding complex things but doesn't necessarily know anything about finance. So whenever I need to explain something, I'll explain something to her, and then if she understands it, then I feel like I've done the job, and that's what will go in the book or in the writing. A good way to do that is often to analogize. If there is something that's out in the world that is complicated, try and bring it back to some everyday experience that most people will understand. And there are various different ways of doing that. I've often tried to, and let me think of an example.
Okay. An example. Well, so I'll tell you one. I think I like your.
All right. Okay.
Because I also, funny enough, I use my mom, and I am my background is actuarial, and people at my church think I'm an actuarist, and they think I am so many things that my mom has tried to explain what it is that I do, and I think I use the mom test too. And when I moved to my current role, my mom said, "Oh, so what is it that you do?" And then I said, "So I'm a fiduciary manager." And then she was like, "So what does a fiduciary manager do?" And then I explained to her that, you get your clothes made by a tailor because a tailor is good. It's not that you're incapable, because my mom can sew, but if she had to sew, one, she doesn't have a sewing machine, and two, it would take her a long time because she doesn't sew every day. So she has to almost learn everything else about sewing, whereas a tailor, actually, they're sewing every day. So pattern cutting, making patterns, that's at the tip of their fingers. And I said, so if you think about it in the financial world, I'm sort of the specialist tailor. So I'm sewing every day. I'm always catching up new trends, new fashion trends every day. And so people who want really great garments made, they come to me, and then they say to me, okay, I would like this garment made. And then I take it away. And then they say, maybe clients can come to me and say, either is it, do I want a dress? They can be specific if they want a dress, or they can just say, make me something, I'm going somewhere. And I'll work with them to actually just make the dress, do everything about the dress. And then that's it. And so my mom's like, oh, okay. And I was like, yeah. And why would you give a professional? Because I can get it done in 2 days, whereas it might take you 2 months. And I'm, for me, it's an easy task. So it was quite interesting. I was laughing when you said mom, because my mom is the test too of whether or not I'm getting something across.
Fantastic analogy there. Much better than the one I was going to use.
Not at all. I'm sure that's not true. There's a very interesting question as well. That's just hope that's answered your question, attendee. Oh, actually, yeah, I think that's actually captured all the parts of your question. There's a question in here about challenges in the banking industry, and I might even expand that to maybe talk about the banking and investment industry, particularly those that might have arisen due to COVID.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I feel like the general uncertainty, I couldn't say for sure how the general uncertainty around COVID has affected hiring practices, but I think it's a case of people are needing to be particularly resilient in terms of lack of clarity on kind of where jobs are to be done at the moment. Some people are bringing people back in a hybrid manner, and people are returning to the office at different rates. So there's a lot more considerations around those kind of areas. But specifically with the banking and finance industry in terms of hiring, I don't really have a feel for that.
Yeah.
Any insights from you?
So I work in asset management, so not directly banking, but I think if you think about business challenges due to COVID, these will be largely the same, right? It's an ever-changing landscape. For a long time, we were working to be quite global organizations where travel was possible, where I could be in New York tomorrow and coming back and doing something different. And somehow now we have to think about different ways of doing things. Sales, for instance, is particularly hard when it's hard to read the energy of somebody when you're far away or you're doing it through a screen. So say, for instance, last year, where we weren't able to do client meetings in person, some of the nuanced things that you can use to influence people, you can read the energy of the room when you're in there. But when it's a computer, it can be quite hard to be like, are you getting it? And sense the energy. So, if you think about how any business, banks included, they're going to really struggle to think about different ways of working, different ways of, building relationships. For instance, a lot of relationships have been built either by having a drink, meeting in person. Even when you think about teams working coherently, teams not being able to meet up in numbers means that we have to find different ways to work as teams. So I think if you have that kind of question, you want to think about the overall business. And even if you think about the challenges that the world sees, those will be specifically, the challenges that any business will face. So, we have a different, like I'm working from home this afternoon, and if I was working in a bank, I would still be wanting to work from home. And so there is now a different world where, different technological requirements are needed. So those kind of things I think would be, you could pick out as potential challenges. I hope that answers your question there. We've got a few more there, so I think let's go through those. I especially like this question because I think particularly in a sales role, you get a lot of it. And I guess I want to stop saying sales role because, again, one of the things that Lindsay has taught us and shown us is that most of our roles, if not all of our roles, you are selling something. You might not be selling a product, but you're selling yourself. And if you think about that, every single time you're at an interview, that you're trying to sell yourself, you want that person to go away thinking, Lindsay's the guy for the job. I want Lindsay on my team. And so that's exactly what you're doing. So you are selling, even though, there's been traditionally sort of that dirtiness surrounded with the word. And that next question we're going to go to is, what kind of questions can be asked to demonstrate commercial awareness? So that's one of those competencies that are usually asked in interviews. And maybe how would you tackle that, Lindsay?
Oh, sure. So demonstrating commercial awareness, absolutely essential in any interview, and particularly in this area. What I think, if I was in the interviewer's chair, I think I would want to know that the person opposite me understands at a very basic level what my business does. So, for example, let's say I'm at a fixed income investor. Now, fixed income instruments, they're basically debt instruments. You collect interest and principal at maturity. So if the person opposite me started answering about, say, the equity market, how the stock market is doing, it would demonstrate that they didn't really know what my particular business is. So you need to think about, what are the drivers in the debt market? What motivations do the buyers have? Say, buyers of bonds or fixed income instruments are generally looking for safety and reliable payments on the capital rather than for their capital to grow exponentially over years and years and years. So demonstrating that basic knowledge. And then there are courses like, say, CFA Investment Foundations, or even just a quick look through Investopedia to kind of fill in those gaps in your knowledge if you have any of those around what the various asset classes are, which institutions what do they actually invest in, and also the annual reports or even just the stewardship reports of those companies or asset managers will often give you a bit more insight into what they think they're doing on behalf of those clients. So just that background research is very, very important. But yes, they could ask you from a broad slate of questions that will demonstrate that you know about basically what are the drivers of their business, how are they being affected right now, particularly amid COVID, and in general what their goals and motivations are of that organization. Anything to add, Memento?
Thank you, Lindsay. So, I mean, that's fantastic as a response. I'm not sure there's a lot I could add. I think it can be commercial awareness. You can demonstrate in loads of different ways, though. Like, I think, as Lindsay said, preparing when you're going to an organization specifically. Another thing you could do is maybe look at it in a slightly different way. You could show where you have shown some commercial awareness. So maybe, are there any projects that you've worked on that you've tried to save money? You know, are there any projects that you have, been a part of where you even took charge to say we decided to go and buy things at Costco instead of buying them from the supermarket because we realized that there is a cost differential that was there, and that enabled us to make a bigger profit. So I think it can be quite challenging when you feel you don't have an extensive Rolodex of experiences where you can show that, but actually think back to, did you throw a family function, and did you need, as part of that function, to really think about the costs, because there was obviously a limit to how much money you can spend, and are you able to show that as a person you're thinking about the other aspects? Another bit that really ties in quite well with what Lindsay was saying is thinking about the regulatory environment that affects that business or that specific, market. And I'm saying this because, Lindsay and I were chatting about his role at the FRC and how it affects people like me in my role and things like that. And you can show that that how the market works by showing that you understand that, oh, actually, this market is a regulated market, and these are the players and what are the priorities. By going on the FRC's website, the FCA's website, for instance, they will give you some of those commercial priorities that the regulator is looking at, and they can help you shape those kind of responses.
Mentor, I'm worried you're after my job.
You wait and see. I'm absolutely coming for it. There's an interesting question here that's really tied into the commercial aspect. And I think I will go to that before going through some of them. But absolutely, please keep the questions coming. It says, what are some of the highest highest paid job roles in sales? And I mean, most firms, the most highest paid people tend to be salespeople, right? Like, I think this may not be well known. Their success tends to be linked to how well they do, really. So I think if maybe Lindsay, am I lying by saying I feel like salespeople are they're killing it out there?
That is true. I think salespeople are in a kind of lucky area because the amount of value they deliver can actually be counted very, very easily. And if you're someone who's taking a percentage of that, even a small percentage of a large number is still a large number.
Exactly.
And so that's how that works. But I interpreted Vikash's question another way, just saying, what are some of the highest positions you can reach in the hierarchy? Okay. Maybe I'm just less money oriented. Maybe that's why I work for a regulator. Anyway. But yeah, there are sales roles right the way up the hierarchy. There are business development directors who sit on boards of organizations. So it is definitely an area that has progression potential. You can go the whole way up.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And if that's not the way the question was meant, I'm really sorry. I'm not only money orientated, but I do see that, business, and to be honest, like if you think about it, right, businesses exist to make money. And having, you can see in many organizations, whether in financial services or otherwise, how many people can make it to the top just from being sales, because they can demonstrate their value and they can share their vision. They tend to be better storytellers, and storytellers are the people that inspire us to follow them, that inspire, hard work. Because if you have somebody at the helm who is a great storyteller who can bring you and influence you with them, then absolutely you're going with that person, right? You're following them into the pits of everything. So quite an important task there. I hope that answers your question. I will go through a different question. What would a process of an interview for a job, apprenticeship, or university work similar or differently? Lindsay, I'll pass that to you first.
Oh, okay. Now let's see. I've only ever interviewed for jobs. I actually went straight into the industry from school. I didn't do what would be known today as an apprenticeship. So at the end of the day, the principles of an interview will be very similar throughout all of those things. I'm certain of that much. Even though the processes might be different, the style of interviewers may be different. Essentially, they'll want to know, is the person in front of me competent? Are they somebody I can trust? Do they know the job, and can they do it to a high standard? In terms of the specific process, that will differ not just from job versus apprenticeship versus university, but even between very similar institutions in the same sector. Each hiring organization has its own way. Some will use things like, I don't know, psychometric testing. Others will not bother with that. Some will have very structured interviews with several people. Sometimes you might just be sat across from one person who will make a very quick decision. So those processes are as varied as there are plants on the earth. It's really not something we can kind of tie down all that narrowly. But good question.
Yeah, really good question. I think there's nothing more that I would even add to that. It really depends. I think it actually kind of links us quite nicely to a question that's coming through the chat there. And I'm going to try and paraphrase. The person asking the question sets the scene of, a role, an interview session that they've recently gone through, where they were asked to do a role play as part of the interview. And, they thought maybe I might prepare to sell a pen or, any other item. But when they got there, they were then asked to play the role of a realtor in London. And unfortunately, the person didn't know London very well. And they feel they didn't do well in that. But are there any tips that you could have for preparing for those sort of, weird and wonderful questions that people can bring for you in an interview?
Okay, that's interesting. I think the advice, perhaps in this particular situation, whether you're selling someone a pen, which I've heard so many times, I think it's almost a cliche, or selling a house in London, even if that's not a city you know very well. I think kind of what they're trying to establish is that, can you demonstrate to the person you're selling to that they need whatever it is you have to offer? And that's the same whether you're talking about yourself in the interview or the products that you're trying to sell. If you're trying to sell someone a pen, you need to convince your counterpart that they need to write something now. Then you can sell them a pen. If you're trying to sell somebody a house in London, then you need to convince somebody that they're going to be in London and they need to live in this particular area. Just think less about individual products. The same way, like in my job, I have to think less about individual paragraphs of policy, which is sometimes a dry area, and think more about, okay, if this policy goes through, what is the impact on people? Why is that good for them? And the same thing with these kinds of role play situations. Think about outcomes rather than immediate actions.
Yeah, I think that's really great insight there, Lindsay. I think the thing to really think about is in interviews is the people that are interviewing you are exactly that. They are people. So sometimes people might want to just mix it up in terms of, how they interview. I've certainly been in a string of interviews where, we ask the sort of wild card question, and maybe that was your wild card question. That just wants you, like, it's not really marking the answer, but maybe what they're trying to see is how you think. So exactly what Lindsay was saying, which is, if these questions come up, or, you can, and I know it can be quite hard if you don't know the city or don't know the context, but don't be afraid to ask questions, right? I think is the first thing I would say to you in that situation. If you were being asked to be a realtor in London, you can either say, okay, I know London is really famous for really expensive houses, and basically the fact that nobody can afford to live there. So maybe I could put that in, but you could ask questions. If you actually didn't know anything else about London, to say, okay, that's really great. Would I be able to ask you some questions before I go into it? When you meet people in an interview, they will typically be, because they've already taken the time to meet you, right? They also want you to do well. I don't think interviews are created, and if people are doing them to try to trip people up, they're not doing it right. I think they're not, I've never been in an interview where I think they've done this to try and trip me up. They really want for you to bring the best of your skills and your abilities to the interview and be able to show them. So if you come to a place where, something's really confusing you and really, unclear, I think just take a step back and say, actually, I've never been there, or I don't know what that is. Because, I can tell you I'm an immigrant and, born of a family of immigrants. So certainly early on in my career, I came through a lot of examples or common words and phrases that everybody knows that I have no idea what they mean, because they know Cockney slang or they know something else that I have no idea what it is. And the key thing that I would say that helped me was actually, I'm happy to make myself the person who doesn't know, and to say, listen, I don't know what that means. And actually now I do, because I asked the question. So I'm sorry that didn't go well that time, but I hope wish you the best in your next interviews. You can go back to some more questions, shall we? So what is the role of a business-to-business sales professional in the sales industry? Do you want to take that one, Lindsay?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. I mean, I feel like that's a bit more broader sales than just strictly financial, because like in the financial industry, most of the sales jobs are kind of business oriented. So the business-to-business sales professional is where you're in an organization that sells to other businesses rather than actual people who are going to be consuming the product. Perhaps bringing that to the financial industry, you may be involved in sales to individuals. Perhaps that's in insurance policies or investments or other vehicles. If you're selling to the consumers, that's kind of that's business to consumer. And if you're selling to other institutions, often called institutional sales, so other large asset owners, people like that, that's more looking at the business to business side of things for this industry. But I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and I think, when you think about the business to business thing, I guess the key difference is that the opposite is, I guess, selling to individuals, right? So the skills that you need are probably the same, because you're still speaking to a person. Even though you're selling to a business, the decision maker is a person. And so really, the product might be different because there's a product that may be built specifically for institutions, and there's a product built or structured differently for other people. But remember, I think businesses are doing businesses with it's just people doing business with people, right? Whether it's business to business or business to person. So there is a difference, but the difference is more in the structure or the actual words you might use or the products available. But really, I think about it as they are individuals who you are speaking to. There's also another interesting question that's tied into that one that I think we should just go to, which this person's asking if a sales professional can involve walking down door to door, promoting a brand or a product. And I actually have a funny story. I once worked as the person trying to sell Sky door to door in one summer when I was in university. And if anything, I could tell you about a job that teaches you resilience. It's that. There is nothing like knocking on people's doors and then them telling you no. And it took me a few weeks to get into the swing of things. And I remember I was like maybe 3 weeks in when I realized that when people tell me they already have Virgin, that's not actually a bad thing. First, I thought, oh, when someone tells me they have Virgin, I would just walk away because I'm like, oh, well, they already have something. And I was like, well, no, that means that person already wants TV. I just got to convince them that Sky is better than Virgin. So that feels like a harder thing, than finding somebody who you knock on their door who's like, I don't even want TV. And then it's like, well, I have to convince them TV and then convince them Sky. And I'll say this, it was probably my highest ever paid summer job. Yeah, so that's a different kind of sales. I don't know many people who are selling door to door now, and in terms of financial services, I would doubt that they would be selling door to door due to a lot of regulation that protects people from being badgered in their homes. But I don't know.
I don't think anyone was selling door to door during COVID.
Yes, certainly, exactly. So that's that question. We also have a question here that talks about, is asking really about structuring questions. Shall we go to that? So this is, when it comes to asking the interviewer questions at the end, and I'll tie this in with a previous question that's been asked around, at the end, what do you want to get out of the from the interviewer? They always ask you that opportunity to ask questions at the end. How would you structure that?
Oh, okay, yeah, great question. Important to remember that interviews are a two-way thing. That they will ask you some questions. You need to come with some questions as well. People I've interviewed, the best people I've interviewed, have always had some really insightful questions for me. So you need to think about, firstly, you will have a manager in front of you who knows about that industry. Ask them questions that demonstrate that you've thought about things and that you know the areas that you need to learn in. Ask them, what is it about a particular product in the company's range? Why does that sell so well? Why does that perform well? How does that work? Why are these fees charged? And these are all like small bits of information that you can pick up from public sources, whether it's fund fact sheets, whether it's reports that the institution has issued, or just general market information from the news. Just ask about current affairs and relevant things that have actually influenced the performance of the company, and then get that manager's perspective. Give them the opportunity to tell their story. That would be my advice, I think.
Yeah, and I think on that kind of question, the key thing that I would take away from what Lindsay's just said is preparation, right? Those kind of questions are really where you can shine, because as much as you can prepare for the other stuff, you don't know what they're going to ask. So here, give yourself an opportunity to really shine and show that you're passionate and understand the business, or you've seen what the market is. Is there something that's a key theme? If it's financial services, have you read anything about that business? That's like, or is there anything that's happening in the market, and then that you could ask them, is there a new piece of regulation and how are they facing that challenge? Is there something that is specific to the business? I try to make those questions as specific as I can to the team or to the function, to make sure that they can see that you're also prepared for that question. And it's about structuring it. I think I always say, you want to make sure it's an open question, so that it's, you get the answers and it's not a yes or no kind of answer. Because I interview a lot, and I find sometimes people come to the end and they're like, oh, they ask the easy question, which is, what's the next stage? And it's like, that's kind of the easy one. I'm always going to tell you that anyway, right?
Yeah.
But if you can show me that you're really interested in either something we've talked about as part of the interview, or you're really interested in something that, I attended an interview a couple of years back now, just before COVID, in person, where on the panel was myself and somebody on my team who had just done a podcast. And that person had obviously heard the podcast, and this podcast was available on our company website. And so they asked some questions about the podcast, and I was like, what, kudos to this person. They went and researched their interviewers and asked specific questions that relate to their experiences. And I was like, what, this candidate is prepared. And this was when I was meeting a lot of candidates that couldn't really evidence how prepared they were. And so that was the standout thing to do. So, you could find things that are personal to those people, but you could also find if they've written articles. I think if you're ever being interviewed by Lindsay, I know there's a lot of material out there that you can reach out that he's written, and you could quiz him and he's maybe forgotten about it.
Yes,
so
indeed.
So thank you for that one. I've got a few other questions. Oh, somebody followed up on the door-to-door sales role, whether I felt annoyed by that role. I mean, not really, actually, when it came into it. I felt really lucky to have a job. It was the summer of the post-crisis, and nobody could find summer jobs because the world was just at an awkward place, and I needed to earn some money. And so I was happy to have the role, and I knew what I was sort of signing up for. And I'll tell you now, I sell as part of my role, and you will in part of any role you do. And it was one of those character building roles that I feel I look back at over 10 years later and I still think, wow, I did that. So yeah, that was that. There's also a question here about choosing what part of sales you work in. Yes, you do. I guess you can apply for a role that's specific to something that you know or are passionate about. But, I would say to you, don't be choosy at the beginning because you actually don't know what you're good at until you try it out. I'll be honest, I come from an actuarial background and I landed in investment because the hiring manager I spoke to said, I think you're a good fit for investments. And I had applied for a pensions sort of internship. And then they said, no, I think you're a good fit for investments. And I went to investments and I realized that, I was a good fit. I don't know, obviously, what would have happened if I went to pensions, but I absolutely love what I'm doing. It's over a decade in and I'm still enjoying it. So don't wed yourself when you're going into interviews to just one thing or one thing you think is the way you want to do it, because open yourself out to opportunities that would come, and you might be surprised what comes along.
Very well said.
So another question that's almost tied into one we answered before, someone attended an interview and then they were given 2 minutes to make an additional comment. And they've said, oh, okay, what's a good response at the end, almost like a wrap-up thing? What's a good response to that, Lindsay?
Okay, so at the risk of repeating myself, it's communicate and influence and tell your own story. For me, the things I'd be throwing in there are, what have I been working on lately? What have I found interesting? What achievements have I done? Just throw in things in your story that are relevant to your role, and that the interviewer will be impressed by. It's your opportunity to shine. Those are the best 2 minutes in any interview, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would absolutely, Lindsay's absolutely right. And if there's anything in the interview, because I'm presuming these questions come at the end of the interview. So if there's anything that you've discussed in the interview that you're particularly passionate about, it's also a good time to say, you know what, has the interview made you more excited about the role? Or has the interview, obviously I'm hoping at this point you're more excited about the role, having met the team, having understood the challenges, you are ready to take the challenge. That's a good line to close with, to say, I've done some research on the company, but this interview has given me an opportunity to bring that to life. When I see the team, I'm really excited, or when I understand what you guys have, the vision for the future, I'm really excited to join the team. That's quite a good wrap-up thing, because it shows you can bring up some specific things you've discussed or they've shared about their company's vision, their challenges, then that's a good thing to use as part of that wrap up, but also bringing it to yourself and to say, I'm excited about this because, etc., etc. So that's one. There's a question here about somebody who wants to apply for a sales position in asset management, but they don't have any experience in asset management. How can they make myself more able to compete with other candidates that have an internship? How would you advise this candidate, Lindsay?
That's an interesting question, isn't it? It's like, it might feel like a disadvantage, but the truth is, everybody does get a chance. I think the first thing is not to rule yourself out of things. Don't think for 1 second that just because you haven't had your internship in asset management, that means you shouldn't apply. Of course, still apply, keep trying, and if you'll get the opportunity to make your case, turn up prepared for it. Do some research, speak to people in the industry, reach out to peers. There's a great peer network on LinkedIn that you can reach out to. Anybody there who are able to advise you, and then just take your opportunity. And if you get an interview, make sure you use that opportunity to communicate, influence, and tell your story, and then take it from there.
Perfect. I think that's absolutely is right. I think, it's quite easy to think of yourself as being disadvantaged because you don't have that experience, but what you bring is a different kind of experience, and it might not be a sales internship. Again, I think, I've just given you an example of a job where I was walking door to door selling nothing to do with asset management. Now, when I talk about, my experience in sales, or my experience in life, I talk about resilience. That same resilience that made me knock on the door after the fourth or fifth rejection is the same resilience I'm going to bring to this, to your role in asset management sales. That same resilience that like led me to keep doing that, I'm going to keep bringing that, or that same excitement, or that same, after 20 people have banged their doors at you, by the time you lock on door 21, remember, that's the first time they're seeing you. They don't know everybody's been banging your door. So I have to go, hi again. So, those are the kind of things you can use to bring out in your experience. I think really think about your life experiences and how they've taught you. I give examples of, I'm involved in my church, for instance. I'm not selling anything to anybody, really, but I'm often having to influence. I'm having to convince them to do a certain thing in a certain way because I think it's the best way. And it's not pure sales, but I would argue that I'm selling an idea and I'm looking for people to, get on board with an idea. So please don't think you're disadvantaged. I think exactly what Lindsay said, it could actually be an asset, whatever experiences you have. The thing you have to do as a candidate is to take that time to become self-aware and know what what you can bring and how you can tell your story using that. So good luck to the person who answered that question. There's a bit of a longish question here that I'm going to try to.
I was going to say we've only got 5 minutes left.
Oh yes, we actually only have 5 minutes left.
Time flies.
Ooh, okay. So to the person who's asked this question in the IT SAS sector, please do send me a private email. Do connect with us on LinkedIn and on, email us. We're always happy to help. I hope we've come across as incredibly, genuine and happy to help people. We are passionate about, opening up the industry and, passionate about diversity. And so certainly, I'm always, I might not be able to respond right away, but we'll definitely look to respond. And I know that Lindsay he does a lot of work volunteering for the CFA, and as well as giving us his evening today. So we always have this question that we ask at the end of every session. So I feel like I absolutely have to ask this question so that, yeah. So Lindsay, can you tell us, only one word answers, although we have 1 minute more, I might ask you to explain it. Can you tell us what you wanted to be when you were growing up?
Oh, okay. I've told my career story a while ago. I was actually pretty keen on being an accountant.
Wow.
So during the I Am campaign last year, I did a recording about all of that. So everybody can Google that if they're interested. But yeah, no astronaut or action figure or anything like that. No accountant. Kind of
accountant. I mean, that's.
But I was successful, so there's that.
Exactly, you are obviously living your dreams there. I mean, I'll answer that question and really show that I didn't get to live my dreams, but I think it was a very conscious choice that I made there. So when I was growing up, I wanted to be a doctor, and then I realized that I absolutely am afraid of blood. By the time I grew up, like
That's not gonna work.
Like that wasn't quite going to work. I'm afraid of my own blood, let alone somebody else's. So that brings us to the end of the session, guys. So I hope that you've really enjoyed the session and you found it useful. I hope that you've been able to get some tips that will help you go on taking your interviews. I think in particular, making sure that you shouldn't think you're disadvantaged because of the experiences that you have. Really do that work to introspect and think about the things you've done and how those things can show some of those competencies, that teamwork, that accountability, that confidence, that resilience, the skills that you're needing to show. Think about what you've done. As a reminder, of course, all our sessions are recorded and then they're always added to the Skills Workshop website. So go back, take a look, and if there's anything you want to go back to, as I said, we only have one more session until June next year, where we will begin all of this fun again. So if you haven't registered, go on the website and register. And what's left is to say thank you to Lindsay for being such a good sport tonight. Please connect with us both on LinkedIn, send us emails, send us messages. We're happy to, chat through and answer any question. You guys have been fun. Thank you for your participation in the question and answers. If we didn't get to your question, please send either of us a message and we will try to answer that directly. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. It's been great.
It's been great. Thank you.